Hello, thank you for having me here. I feel very privileged to talk about automated decision making. This will be more educational and technical than political, but it's in the nature of this topic that it's affecting everybody globally in this. My context is I work in data research and journalism. I do lectures on that. I do a lab in Hamburg for data forensics, so I see all the mess that happens when people have accidents with information and data. Short disclosure, I worked for Google 14 years ago at university. I have no financial ties to any IT company. I currently funded by Google DNI, totally independent from any kind of outcome, and I get compensated for participation by Deutsche Welle, who sent me here. I'm very happy about that. These remarks in 10 minutes are insane, so I try to be as various as possible. So to start with myself, I'm a human example of recognition failure because I have facial blindness. I can't recognize people by faces. So when I wake up tomorrow, I probably forget all of what you look like, and I have to recognize you by different things. And I wasn't aware of that for a long time, so I behave differently from other people, and people would why is he not recognizing me in the train station, at the airport, or something like that? And they already put it like he's lost in his mind, he's doing something different. And my decision making was really different from other people, but I didn't know. And there's the same problem with computers and these black box systems. They don't know, and we don't know how they make their decisions. Only when you highlight it, you get aware, and then you see what other decisions are made of. So the classic setup in computing is you program a set of rules, and the more complex the rules get, the more expensive and specific. It's really getting out of hand. The rising complexity and accountability who set up these rules and who's responsible for them is something that the tech companies would like to, at some point, shortcut, or governments or structures. So the new idea is teach computers by data, machine learning, and algorithms. So a processing that kind of works with the data and has a kind of outcome. The principle is to repeat and correct. It's supposed to overcome complexity and reduce costs, but as you will see, I don't think so. And in a way, what I'm presenting here has the wrong title. It should say ethics in using automated decision making, because ADM is removing the humans from the discussion point. So you hear cars pollute the environment or guns kill people, but it is people drive cars which pollute the environment, and it's people who fire guns, and that's the mess. So, black box. ADM systems based on machine learning are black boxes. They're just the image for you can't see what's happening, and they put something in, something comes out. Prediction of outcome is a neural network and of probability, which I show later. But this is the way to dodge the responsibility bullet. So if you see automation decision making put into a discussion, it's almost always for reasons that the decision making process is getting too complex, too costly, or too political, complicated, I don't know. And it's also something that turns into multi-party things. So you have a data supply, you have a program, you have a contractor, and suddenly everybody would be accountable, or nobody? Probably nobody. So there's bias, and this is how we come to ethics. So teachers have a bias. I do. I select material for my students. I select methods. I select end-to-end teaching and learning. So when you start teaching machines, you transfer your values to the machines, which then are interpreted by the machines. This is always what I ask. What can go wrong? Well, what? Free speech gets really different. Performance reviews are made by machines. Worker security gets picky. Medical decisions might get totally in a different way. Job selection. Everybody in the future will be at some point involved everywhere, because machine learning and machine decision making is put into place. So to put your mind into this, there's this classic dilemma for human decision making with a machine. So you're on a train, imagine that, and this train can't stop. You see ahead there is 5 people on these train tracks, and you will run over these humans and probably kill them. Or you can push a button, the train will be diverted, and this will only kill another human who's accidentally standing on the other side of the tracks. So if you interact and you act with the machine, only one person dies. If you don't interact, 5 people will die. That's a dilemma that everybody's discussing for the last at least 2 years, because it highlights the use of technology and in human interaction. If you teach a machine to decide, well, you're removed from the problem. At least what people are thinking, they're removed from the problem. It's like, we're not like doing anything anymore. The computer is doing what we taught the computer. And so the real world dilemma, for example, automated cars. You will see them at some point. Right now, assisted driving, less accidents, really cool. Automated driving, new type of accidents. Like, would you kill the passenger or the pedestrian in case of a scenario where no other outcome is possible? And a German company, Mercedes-Benz, said, passengers first. They're the first company to say, like, pedestrians, I'm sorry, but we're selling cars to people which are putting safety first, so we might kill people because our algorithm is done to. When you go to machine learning and decision making, going more now in the complex of internet companies, image recognition, which is the start of decision making, like who are we like making the decision on? It's about gorillas, dogs, bananas, and turtle, and you're like, what? There's this example for Google, you can't search for gorillas. And the reason is that the algorithm and this decision making that differentiates different kind of objects and animals and humans is the Google black box can't decide if it's a dark-skinned person or a gorilla with a probability that makes it sane. So everybody had their fun while this was actually still working, but then naturally, totally understandable, people got offended. It's the same with dogs. Blueberry muffins and chihuahuas are the same for image recognition. Look it up, it's really fascinating. The next thing is bananas. You're like, what can be confused with bananas? This is a little bit more tricky, I'm gonna show it in the next slide. You can make a banana look like a toaster without putting a toaster in the picture. And this is where I want to highlight the fault problem with automated decision making. False hits, so false predictions are a kind of problem only for the individuals who get like flagged at the border or something like that, but it's a real bad problem when you can trigger it. And for the turtles, well, look it up. You can look for a computer, make a turtle look like a gun, which would make, in a more complex scenario, if you carry a turtle around, a threat. Because the turtle looks like a gun, and then you're suddenly walking around with a gun. So that's really bad. So let me show you just this one example. What? 2 minutes, okay. So this is banana on the top, and this is banana with a sticker, which looks for a computer like a toaster. If you take that, it's really insane. Just let it sink in that you can create something that confuses computers so much that they totally classify something different. Okay. So the attempts to fix more data, haha, doesn't work. More tests, yeah, but you test the way wrong. Self-learning, self-teaching, oh my God, if the computer starts teaching themselves, we're all doomed. The requirements on automated decision-making and learning are currently not existent. There's no limit on interaction, there's no trail of training, there's no record of participation, and most systems are not forensic friendly, so you can't really figure out how they work or how they were trained. So just take a look at a totally country that's not really in the focus right now, China. Social scoring, that's a big experiment. We already know what will be happening. Self-censorship, social control, feeling of submission, and guilty by association. Because if you're with people with bad reputation, bad scoring through automated decisions, you're doomed. So you might separate from people you actually love or are attached to because they are influencing your freedom of movement, freedom of bank account, whatever. So, conclusion. I'm sorry that it was so fast and so, like, on the surface, but automated decision-making is a method that might work under specific circumstances, like finding offensive child abuse images on the internet. That might work, but in very specific cases. ADM masks responsibility. So if somebody uses ADM, they probably try to remove their responsibility for something. It removes accountability, and it's $1 million business, so don't expect miracles. When I don't care about you, and it's not about me, automated decision-making is super fine. So, what can you do in action? You should always highlight the ADM problems. You should find out who is responsible for ADM and make these humans visible. Point to the deciders who say automated decision-making is fine for you. Don't wait for a solution from big corporations. You have to find alternatives, from my point of view. And refer to tech communities. Hackers are actually listening through the problems of people since at least the Snowden revelations. We got much more privacy aware, and interact with watchdog organizations like Algorithm Watch. Thank you very much.
شكرا سيباستيان. بالفترة الأخيرة انتشر كثير من الحديث على حول موضوع تنسيق ما بين الحكومات وما بين شركات الإنترنت العملاقة لمكافحة كل ما يسمى بخطاب الكراهية، مكافحة العنف، مكافحة الإرهاب وكل هاي العناوين. بتم استثمار موارد هائلة بالموضوع، بتم تنسيق، انبنى داتابيس مشترك بين الشركات، والشركات عم بتقوم بالتنسيق. ولكن في عديد من الأسئلة اللي بتنطرح. مين بحدد هاي المصطلحات؟ مين بحدد التعريفات؟ شو يعني إرهاب؟ شو يعني عنف؟ شو يعني خطاب كراهية؟ إيش الأشياء اللي بتفوت على هاي المصطلحات أو ما بتفوتش؟ وهل بالفعل في حدا اللي عم بحاول يضمن إنه جزء من أقليات، من مجتمعات مضطهدة، من شعوب محتلة، يعني مين بعطي صوت الضعيف بهاي المعادلة لما احنا بنشوف إنه في حكومات اللي هي قوية ومتنفذة اللي عم بتحاول تسطو وتحدد هاي السياسات؟ هل في سياسات اللي هي عامة اللي عم تمشي على كل المستخدمين، ولا عم بصير تمييز بين منطقة ومنطقة، بين مجموعة ومجموعة؟ للحديث عن سياسات النشر بننتقل للحديث مع ثواب شلبي، متخصصة سياسات النشر في يوتيوب في شركة جوجل.
The mouse isn't moving. I think it's frozen. No. Oh, okay, ماشي. خلاص. No problem. Let me just see this. Present. Okay. مرحبا. My name is Thawab, and can everyone? Okay, sorry. My name is Thawab, and I am a policy specialist for YouTube, specializing in graphic violence and extremism. I've been on the team for the last 3 years, and I am on the team that is probably better known for removing videos off of YouTube that violate YouTube community guidelines, much to the frustration of a few people. What we are lesser known for is the amount of videos that we actually keep online every single day. On a personal level, I'm a Syrian. I was born in Syria, but I live in Ireland, and I've worked over the last few years with refugee communities from my homeland and have also spent a lot of time in Palestine. I'm here as someone who cares deeply about the human rights community and would love to hear from all of you and listen to all your concerns as well. We have a lot to learn at YouTube, and there's so much more we can do for the human rights and activist community, so your feedback is very welcome. I will talk about these topics over the next 10 minutes are community guidelines, what they are exactly, why context is extremely important when uploading videos, tools that you can use as YouTube creators, and our program Creators for Change. Just to give some context, YouTube has over 1 billion daily users. We have 400 hours uploaded every single minute. So the content we deal with is huge, and the impact our team has can also be very big. And that's why we take every decision we make very seriously. Our guidelines, before I get into them specifically, I wanted to go over some of our values. At the same time as describing what isn't allowed on YouTube, we also keep in mind that we want to keep YouTube as a platform for free expression, while also fostering a vibrant community, protecting our users and their privacy. Our guidelines cover the usual suspects. We don't allow nudity or sexual content, threats, and I will go into more detail on our hate speech policies, our violent and graphic content policies. First, in terms of hate speech, we don't allow anything that advocates or encourages violence against a protected group. What do I mean by protected group? It is somebody that is a member of one of these traits that usually you don't have a choice on. So, for example, your race, your gender, your age, and then we recently, because of how the world is changing, we've recently added refugee status as a protected group category, especially given what's happening in Europe, and we realize that a lot of people are being attacked based on being a refugee, which is something they had no control over. Next is our policies around violent or graphic content. As a rule, we don't allow content that's posted to shock people or disgust people. But we also know that YouTube is used by activists, citizen journalists, people documenting human rights abuses, and a lot of that content is very graphic, especially when coming from places such as Syria, such as where we are right now, and even in the United States when documenting police brutality. So for this policy area, we do allow content if there is context provided. So if you give us information in the title, in the description, within the 4 corners of the video, if you tell us why you're uploading this video, it may be allowed. Our next policy area is content related to terrorism. Over the summer, we've recently employed machines to also flag such content. As a rule, we don't allow content that incites people to terrorism. We don't allow content uploaded by prescribed terrorist groups as defined by the US and the UK. And but we also understand that in some parts of the world, you need to talk about terrorist groups. For example, right now, if you search ISIS, you still get a lot of content that talks about ISIS, but doesn't promote ISIS or the acts that they do. And then lastly, what happens, and I think this is relevant to a lot of people here. Sorry, I'm just going to put this laptop down. What happens when violence is a part of your story? Something that we really started to see over the last few years is bystander footage. So you're not a journalist or anything, but you happen to be somewhere where a violent act has happened. So as you can see here in the 2 examples on the right, you have footage from Charlie Hebdo. And when we received this footage, it had a moment of death, and we weren't sure what to do. Is there a maximum threshold for violence on YouTube? We decided that this information is important and critical to understanding the world and what is happening. So footage uploaded by a bystander, but with a lot of context provided, is allowed. And however, footage uploaded by the person who committed the act of violence, wouldn't be allowed. And then similarly here, you have footage from the Kenya shopping mall attack. So for yourselves, if you are a bystander in a violent situation and you do record what's going on, it's really important that if you do upload, you think about adding context, blurring the most graphic parts, and I'll get into exactly how to do that. So why is context important? It's important for users and for reviewers on my team to know why you're uploading the video. If you just upload a graphic scene with no information or footage from a terrorist group with no information, then we're not going to understand your intent. It's going to seem like perhaps you're glorifying violence or you are promoting terrorism. So it's important to think about the intention of your video and to provide as much information, such as a voiceover or text narration within the four corners, within the video itself, and to add a title and description. Don't make violence the whole focus of your video. Ask yourself, why are you uploading? Are you trying to tell a story about what's happening in your backyard? I know for myself as a Syrian, a lot of my friends in Syria have had to upload some really graphic content from where they live, and they want to tell the world what is happening in their country. Similarly, you may want to tell people what is happening in your own cities. So make sure that comes across. And don't use it to celebrate the violent act itself, because it does violate our guidelines. And don't simply rely on title and description. Try to tell your story within the video as well. Lastly, and has it been 10 minutes yet? 2 minutes, okay. Lastly, there's a lot that you can do as well. You can also report content yourself. I know a lot of people here have complained about content being reported that they've uploaded, but you can also report content that you think violates our guidelines on hate speech, on violence, etc. And what happens when you do that is it comes to my team for review. Some content doesn't violate our guidelines at all, but like, for example, the most flagged video on YouTube is Justin Bieber video. And just because you don't like a video, it might not come down. Secondly, we may age restrict the video. So a lot of video that has context but contains graphic material will be put behind the age restriction. Third, we may remove the video with a penalty. So if it does violate our guidelines, like it contains hate speech, then we will remove the video. Our fourth decision, which is quite new, is something called features disabled, which is for content that is borderline, that maybe doesn't violate our hate speech policies, but gets close to it. And it disables comments, ability to share, so it guarantees your right to upload the video, but it doesn't have the benefits of being on YouTube. And then lastly, this is the area that I'm most excited about, which we only launched a week ago. For some videos that you may upload as activists or when documenting human rights, sometimes you're not thinking about adding context. You just want to get the video up there as quickly as possible. You don't put title, description, you don't explain what's going on. And now, rather than removing the video, if we receive this type of video from somebody that we perceive to have a good intent, that is trying to document a human rights abuse, for example, we will make the video private, and then you will get a message explaining why we made this video private, and we will give you a chance to add information to the video. And once you add the information to the video, you can appeal the decision, and we will make the video public again. So it's a way that we can work with you, and we've worked with Human Rights Watch, with the organization Witness, to try to launch this decision. And I'll go quickly through this. The last thing I have on here is a tool that we also worked on with Witness, and this is a blurring tool where you can blur faces. You can also use it to blur graphic scenes. I already went through this. And then if your video is removed, you can appeal the removal. You can also appeal your account being suspended. So it's not just some group of people making a decision that you have no voice in. We highly encourage you to communicate with us and try to understand why your content was removed, what you can do to get it back. And then the last thing I want to mention is, despite all the violence and the hate speech out there, there's a lot of creators making really positive content, telling their stories. And for anyone that wants to talk to me afterwards on positive ways, you can use YouTube and share your story and use it as a way to be vulnerable. And that's the best way, really, to connect with people around the world. Thank you. Yeah.
شكرا ثواب. طبعا زي ما كلنا بنعرف التكنولوجيا عم تتطور في وتيرة سريعة، ويعني يا دوب احنا عم نلحق. التكنولوجيا بتحل كثير قضايا بحياتنا وبتسهل علينا حياتنا، ولكن بنفس الوقت هي نفسها التكنولوجيا اللي بتعرضنا لخطر، بحيث انها بتجمع بيانات ومعلومات عنا وعن حياتنا وعن امورنا الشخصية اللي بتكون مكشوفة لشركات مختلفة ولحكومات مختلفة، حتى مرات كثير بدون ما نكون عارفين عن الموضوع أو واعيين له. للحديث عن التحديات في التقاطع ما بين التكنولوجيا وحقوق الإنسان راح يشارك معنا جوشوا فرانكو، باحث مستشار التكنولوجيا وحقوق الإنسان في منظمة العفو الدولية أمنستي. تفضل جوشوا.
Me? No. Great. Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hamle, for inviting me to speak today. I'm really happy to be here. I'll try to be very quick because I want to leave room for a lot of questions, but I've been asked to speak about human rights law in light of new technology. And I guess if I had a thesis or an argument to make in 10 minutes, I would say that there's a lot of new technology out there, a lot of which has implications for our human rights, but that we shouldn't lose track of the fact that it is the stories of those people who are affected by these new technology who should shape our understanding of what human rights law says. So I want to start by telling a bit about my own story of how I came to work on this issue and talk about surveillance as a human rights violation, which was the first time I worked on tech because of this gentleman in 2013. I'm just going to skip a slide or two in the interest of time, but I started by going to Belarus and looking at what happens in that country where they have a fairly repressive legal environment for human rights activists, and there is a very widespread system of surveillance. And hearing from activists about the effect it had on their lives and their work, it just makes it very difficult to operate, basically. The obstacles to having a meeting, to communicating securely, to safely organizing assemblies and things really drove home for me this idea that when we started out thinking about mass surveillance because of Snowden and things, we instantly went to privacy and thought about privacy as the human right at stake. But really, it's much more broad. It's freedom of expression, it's freedom of peaceful assembly, it's freedom of association, and it's the ability of civil society to function. And that idea has been pretty widely accepted, not necessarily in courts, but in certain communities that I think one of our next presenters will talk about, like special rapporteurs or declarations from UN bodies and things. But what goes further than that, I think, was stories that I began hearing when I looked at people from Uzbekistan who are activists working in Europe. And this woman, Nadezhda Atayeva, when I spoke to her about her work, she's organizer of a human rights organization in France, where she's lived for over a decade, although she's from Uzbekistan. And we were trying to talk about the difficulty she has communicating with family and friends back in Uzbekistan because of the surveillance there and the fear of surveillance there. And what shocked me when I heard it was when she told me that she hasn't spoken to her family in over a decade. And that was something that I began asking refugees from Uzbekistan that I met around Europe, in Sweden and elsewhere. Because when we think about surveillance, we think about privacy. We don't necessarily think about the family rights of refugees in Sweden and their ability to keep in contact with their loved ones. And I think we should, because that's the human rights story that we should be telling about that type of surveillance. So that's my brief intro on surveillance. And again, I've been asked to talk about, new technology, and apparently surveillance doesn't qualify anymore. The world moves fast. But with this new technology, let's also not lose sight of the fact that we're making the same stories and same arguments. So this is someone you might recognize. As a candidate, he made some promises, or statements anyway, regarding what he called a Muslim registry. We don't know what that means, but it can't mean anything good. And it's some sort of database, I guess, of Muslim people living in the United States. And this brings me to the topic of big data. And you know, we generate data all the time when we're on the web. When we're browsing websites, there are cookies tracking what we click and which websites we visit. As we move around with our portable surveillance devices, our locations, our communications are being uploaded and tracked by people. And with the Internet of Things, we're going to have even more internet-connected devices, our internet-connected televisions, our internet-connected, what have you, toasters. I don't know, maybe they're bananas. Why we need an internet-connected toaster, I have no idea. But that data gets stored somewhere. And we began thinking about what is a Muslim registry and how could someone actually go about figuring out who are all of the Muslims in the United States. And we started to look at this issue of data brokers, which are companies that buy and sell huge quantities of data about you and I that's collected in this way. And really, if we wanted to identify every Muslim person in the United States, well, I don't know about every, but a great deal of them, we could simply buy it. And these are a lot of the companies that we checked out, and if we just check religion, we can get a list of thousands of people's names, addresses, personal information. It's all for sale. And that, I think, is really dangerous. And when we think about this, data brokers are an issue that's been treated a lot under questions of data protection as an issue of consumer rights. And that's correct, and a lot of wonderful work is being done there. But I think we're thinking about it less as an issue potentially of state surveillance, as an issue about discrimination, of freedom of religion. And I think those are arguments we should be thinking about with new tech. And you know, this is a relatively benign one. What happens when you take it to an extreme? Well, you get Baltimore. In Baltimore, which is a city in the United States, there were protests recently when a man named Freddie Gray died in the back of a police van. During those protests, the protesters were filmed and surveilled from two different airplanes, one from the FBI, the federal authorities in the US, and one from the Baltimore police. On the ground, police were using social media monitoring software by a company called Geofedia, and they were using it to locate social media accounts in the area of the protest, scan them for the pictures on those accounts, run those pictures through a facial recognition database, and in the words of the company, and we know this, by the way, because the company advertised that they did this, police officers were able to run the photos, blah, 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 to discover rioters with outstanding warrants and arrest them directly from the crowd, which to me is highly suspect, because if you're rioting, you don't need to have an outstanding warrant to get arrested. So this to me sounds like something that's getting in the way of people's right to protest, and specific people's right to protest, and it will disproportionately impact on people who are disproportionately affected by the justice system in the US, such as African American people. So when we talk about this, again, we're talking about discrimination, the right to protest, racial justice, police brutality, all these issues. I'm running late. This is all so far about finding out bits of data. What we're not talking about is how all of this data can also be used to make predictions about you and profile you. This is a graphic by a group called the Share Data Labs in Serbia. What they're attempting to do, and you'd have to look at it much bigger, it's a really cool graphic, is they're trying to figure out the inputs and outputs of Facebook. And this is not my research, so as I said, I can't vouch for it, and if you want to comment, please do. But the idea, I think, is essentially if you're looking at what is being possibly sold by an advertising agent online, be it Facebook or anyone else. I just happen to have this graphic for Facebook. You can choose something, say, like business traveler. I want to advertise to business travelers. Well, I never told Facebook I'm a business traveler, so how would you figure that out, right? One possible way you could would be from tracking the GPS location of my phone and seeing where I go and where I spend my time. That's one example of how you might be profiled. And that's for selling ads. And whatever you think of selling ads, that's fine. But what about when the state does it? This guy again. Another one of his ideas was that we should have a Muslim ban, a ban on Muslim immigrants coming to the United States. He's then clarified that in fact what he meant was he wanted a system of extreme vetting. We don't know what that means, but now there's a proposal, an actual proposal being put forward by the federal government for digital extreme vetting, which is that they want companies to come forward and build them a system for this extreme vetting where they will have a determination by automation of which immigrants will be a, quote, positive contributing member of society or contribute to national interests and who might go on to commit a crime or even an act of terrorism. And we, with a number of partner organizations, we oppose this, along with data scientists who made the point that this is really not an effective use of prediction. You can't predict for something that you can't define, and you're going to end up using substitute proxy information to try to make these predictions. And it's quite obvious that proxies are going to lead to discrimination against Muslim people, and that was exactly the intent of the proposal. And so we're calling on that not to happen. And we're calling on this to be, I think from human rights law point of view, when we talk about this again, let's not focus on the new technology, let's focus on the good old human rights that are at stake here. This is about freedom of religion, the right to seek asylum, non-discrimination, and all of those things. And one of the important things here is the role of companies. So one of the main calls we have is that companies should never take this contract. They shouldn't build this, because companies have a responsibility to respect human rights. These are the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights that lay that out quite clearly. By respect, I mean don't violate those rights. And building that system, we feel, would fail that. I'm not doing horribly. So I'll make one last point, which I know it's been 10 minutes. The last thing I would say about content mediation, I know we're going to hear from Facebook next, is that there's, I've heard this morning in this really interesting first panel, a lot of stories about confusion over what can be taken down, what can remain up, and what can lead to arrest or even prosecution when posting online. And I think it sounds like a number of concerns about the laws themselves, be they Palestinian laws or Israeli laws that are used in this context. But I think there's also a role to look at the corporate actors in this space and the platforms under the responsibility to protect. The stories I was hearing this morning that would inform at first glance, having spent only one morning thinking about this now, would be the right to freedom of expression. Specifically, under national law, if you want to restrict the right to freedom of expression, it has to be done on the basis of law. And if we're talking about law, I don't mean anything written on paper. The principle of legality means that the law has to be sufficiently clear for people to regulate their conduct in accordance with the law. In other words, if you don't know what the law is, then you don't know what's legal and what's not legal, then how can you follow the law? And you're going to end up self-censoring or worse. And so in that, I think there's a real role for governments and for corporate actors to make sure that there's enough clarity for people to know what they're allowed to do online and what not. So that's my very brief whirlwind tour of how I would go about thinking about how I do go about thinking about some of these new technologies in lights of human rights law, and I really look forward to hearing more about how these things are affecting people here to forward that conversation. Thanks for having me.
شكرا جوشوا. في السنوات الأخيرة في العديد من الحالات الاعتقال على خلفية المشاركة في شبكات التواصل الاجتماعي وخصوصا بالفيسبوك على يد الاحتلال الإسرائيلي. شاهدنا كمان حالات اللي فيها كل موضوع عمليا إغلاق صفحات ومحتوى اللي تم إزالته، تصريحات لسياسيين إسرائيليين اللي صرحوا بوجود اتفاقية خاصة مع شركة فيسبوك وإلى آخره. وهنا بنطرح طبعا السؤال كيف بتم صياغة سياسات النشر لشركة فيسبوك؟ هل هي بالفعل سياسات عامة اللي لكل المستخدمين، أم أنه بتم عمليا الرضوخ لسياسات حكومات معينة اللي هي عندها قوة أكثر كسوق اقتصادي أو لأسباب أخرى لها القدرة على التأثير؟ للحديث عن هاي المواضيع وعن سياسات نشر المحتوى وإدارة المحتوى في مناطق الصراع ننتقل لآيفين كيلر مديرة سياسات المنتجات في شركة فيسبوك.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking Hamley for organizing this conference and inviting us to participate. And secondly, I want to thank you. It is incredibly important for us to come to events like this all around the world and learn about your experiences and how we can improve at Facebook. So as mentioned, my name is Aveen Kelleher and I'm a product policy manager at Facebook. And what that means is I'm actually on the team that creates the rules as to what you can and can't share across the site. Now I'm very conscious that there's a lot of questions about Facebook and a lot of confusion and misconceptions, but unfortunately I only have a very short 10 minutes, so I will try to do what I can, but please feel free to grab me throughout the rest of the day to answer any questions you might have. So very quickly, just to capture what Facebook is all about, really our mission is to build community and bring the world together. Facebook is now used by over 2 billion people around the world. And people often think that we're a very US-centric company, but actually over 85% of our users are based outside of the US and Canada, and we're very mindful of that when it comes to making policies. Closer, sure. And a community this size translates into an incredible amount of content. So every day, over 1 billion photos are uploaded to Facebook. So my team is based across 9 global offices. We are a diverse team. We have former human rights lawyers, former state prosecutors, and people like yourselves who've been involved in the activist and various NGOs, as it's very important that we are diverse in our thinking when it comes to policy making at Facebook, because we do acknowledge that we have a responsibility in this space. So we have one set of policies for the entire world, and they are publicly available and known as our community standards. So you can access them on facebook.com/community standards, and they really detail what you can and can't share all across the site. So when it comes to policy making, we have 3 key principles. Firstly, does the policy result in the equal treatment of everyone globally? So it doesn't matter if I'm here in Ramallah, if I'm in Tel Aviv, if I'm in London, Dublin, Jamaica. If I report content, I want you to have the exact same outcome wherever you are based in the world, and that's a very important principle to us. Secondly, is the policy operable? So we have thousands of people all around the world reviewing content, and actually creating guidelines that they can operate at scale is very tricky. So that's another element that we have to consider when making policies. And thirdly, is the policy explicable? Can we meaningfully stand here and explain to you why we did or did not take action on a piece of content? I think that's something we can do better at, and we've got feedback, that people don't understand why we take particular actions. So we are trying to be more transparent and communicate our policies as clearly as possible. So our policies cover a number of things, from everything from self-harm, financial fraud, hate speech, credible threats of violence, sexual content, human trafficking. They're all covered by our policies. And we don't just talk to ourselves as a team, but we talk to NGOs, people like yourselves all around the world, academics, various policymakers, lawyers, to get as many people and bring them to the table when we're creating these rules. Because again, we know that it's important and has real impact on how people express themselves. So it's important to say that most content on Facebook is actually not sometimes that harmful from a safety point of view. Even though I know that many of you in this region may see difficult content, there are also a lot of positive uses of Facebook. It's mostly birthdays and dinners, etc. But of course, we do acknowledge that some content is inherently harmful and has no place on our site. So very quickly, just to explain our hate speech policies. So it's really complicated, it's challenging, it's hard. There are no international accepted definitions of hate speech, but we have consulted extensively with lawyers and policymakers and NGOs all around the world, and we really remove any content that attacks people based on their membership of these protected categories. So that's race, ethnicity, national origin, religious affiliation, serious disability or disease, sex, gender or gender identity, and sexual orientation. Now, hate speech is not like pornography. It's not like you see it, you know it, you remove it. It's actually very nuanced. So we do allow people to challenge ideas, institutions, and practices. So for example, you could debate about the Catholic Church or Catholicism, but you can't make hateful statements about all Catholics. We also allow people to share content to raise awareness, because of course we want people again to be able to really inform the global community of the content they're seeing, but we ask you to be as clear as possible with your context in the same way that YouTube does. We look at context and we want you to be clear that you are sharing certain types of content to raise awareness and are condemning hate speech. We also allow certain types of content when it's humorous or satirical in nature. Now that can be challenging because humor can be very subjective, but sometimes we do see certain types of content that doesn't descend into hate speech and is more so satirical in nature. With all content on Facebook, we urge people to be aware of who they're sharing their content with. So we always advise people to be very savvy about their privacy settings. People will often come to us and say they had a huge problem on Facebook, and you will go and talk to them about their privacy and they will realize everything they shared was public, and then everybody can access it, everybody can screenshot it. So it's really important to get on top of your privacy settings and really understand who you are sharing your content with. So just very quickly on reporting. So, not working? It's not working? Try this one? Apologies. So it's very important to say that reporting is 100%, that's better. Reporting is 100% confidential. And what that means is we will never disclose who reported the content to us. So people are oftentimes afraid to report content on Facebook, especially through their personal profiles. But we really want to assure you that we will not disclose who reported content to anyone. Every piece of content on Facebook can be reported, so you just click on the right-hand side of a piece of content and you can report that content. It's important to always report the abusive content itself. So for example, if you see, comments under a video and you're concerned about a particular comment rather than the video, we ask you to actually report the specific comment instead of reporting the whole video, because we want our reviewers to really understand the content that you are concerned about. It's actually enough to report content once. So people often think, oh, if I report something 1,000 times, Facebook will surely remove it. That's really not the case. We simply need one violation and one report to take action on content. We would never action content that doesn't violate our standards because there is X amount of reports. We're always working to make our mechanisms better. So again, if you have any feedback on reporting options, reporting flows, we want to hear it. We have actually teams who go around the world and research what actually works in different regions. But again, we're open to learning more in that space. So people often think of Facebook that it must be machines doing all of the reviewing. That's absolutely not the case. We actually have over 4,000 people globally reviewing content, and we've just announced that we will be increasing that number by 3,500 globally over the next 2 years. So it's a huge amount of people, and these are local people who come with native language expertise. They're subject matter experts because context is so important. So even within the Middle East, from country to country, even from region, town to town, context can vary so incredibly. So we really seek to hire people from regions who can come and understand the various contexts. And really our message is we are here to help 24/7. And our team are always responsive when it comes to reports, and we triage reports based on real world harm. So just very quickly to recap on our safety tools. So privacy, as I said, is very important. We have a tool called Privacy Basics, and if you go to the right-hand side of Facebook, you drop down the menu, there's actually a dinosaur icon. I do that every month or 6 weeks just to make sure that I'm fully on top of it, and I really recommend that everybody does that, just so you're reminding yourself, who am I sharing my posts with, what are my current settings? If somebody looks at my profile, what would they see? Again, the visibility, thinking about each post and who I want to share it with. You can break that down into, is it your friends, is it friends of friends, is it just a particular customized list? So you really are in control when it comes to your privacy settings. You can block anyone on Facebook that you don't want to interact with. And of course, always reminding ourselves to report content that violates our community standards. Now, when it comes to hateful content on Facebook, yes, we can have strong policies. Yes, we can have a strong reporting mechanisms and a strong team, but it doesn't actually remove the societal problem that is hate speech. So therefore, we see Facebook as a really unique opportunity to spread positive messages to counter hateful and extreme messages. So I just wanted to share some of the best practices that we've discovered that make counter speech on Facebook effective. So this happens every single day on Facebook, and we've invested heavily in research to understand how this works and what kind of formats are best. So unsurprisingly, photos and videos are the most effective. We all know that it's a very visual world, and those are the types of content that tend to be engaged with most. Actually, videos are now engaged with 9 times more than photographs on Facebook. The tone of speech is very important, so using very negative speech doesn't actually result in much engagement. It's much better to be constructive or often humorous. That tends to have much more reach and engagement than simply being really negative. The most effective speaker is often a credible voice. So it's not Facebook, it's often, unfortunately, not the government. It may be an imam in a community, it may be, a local soccer star. So finding somebody who resonates with the audience that you want to reach is very important. So being conversational, using kind of easy language, not being too formal. Being authentic, so being yourself, being true to who your organization or the cause that you're representing may be. Again, using visual is very important. And keeping it simple. People are scrolling very fast through their Facebook feed, as you all know. We're moving around with our phones, and really you only have a few seconds to capture people's attention. So as visual and as simple as possible as you can be. And then timely, so you want to think about how often do I want to post to my page? Is it every day? Is it every hour? So really mapping out how you want to plan a particular campaign or you increasing your reach on Facebook. So we have a page for nonprofits on Facebook, and I advise you as well to go and check that out if you are interested in building your presence and spreading positive messages and raising awareness on our platform. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm sorry that I can't address, I know there are other questions, but hopefully we'll get to them shortly.
شكرا ايفن. الحقوق الرقمية مفهوم ومصطلح اللي عم بتطور بالفترة الأخيرة مع تطور طبعا بارتباطه بالتكنولوجيا وبتطور التكنولوجيا، وعم بتم دمجه وادماجه في السنوات الأخيرة في آليات الدولية لحقوق الإنسان أو في المؤسسات الدولية. وللحديث عن هذا الموضوع بننتقل لأنرييت إستر هاينسن، مديرة السياسات الاستراتيجية والدولية لAPC جمعية الاتصالات التقدمية. تفضلي.
Can you hear me? Yes, it's working. Great. Thanks, Nadine. And it's interesting to be last. I will try to actually comment on some of the presentations. Just about APC, Association for Progressive Communications. We're an international network. We're very proud to have Hamle as a member of organizations like Hamle around the world working on the internet for social justice and development. And we established in 1990, emerging from struggles of that era, the anti-apartheid struggle and the struggle against dictatorships in Central and South America. So to talk about mechanisms, human rights mechanisms, it's really linked to what I think Josh talked about earlier, and also Omar, the international human rights system or international human rights law. And it's challenging to work with this. And I think civil society often asks, why do we work with this? What are the roots? Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we've heard about that. And then various treaties, from treaties on children's rights to women's rights, to the two big covenants, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and on Economic and Social Rights. Something that's important to remember about this system is that it's based on the idea of rights holders and duty bearers. Rights holders are individuals, and that in itself is challenging if you're in a context where oppression and repression targets communities, not just individuals. So that's already a challenge. And then duty bearers, the primary duty bearers in the system, so those who have to uphold the rights, are states. This is also complex when we often can't trust our states, where we know that they might sign on to rights treaties, but they don't respect them in practice. So I think it's always challenging for us to decide, do we use this system? Do we work with this system? Or does it in fact all amount to nothing? And then you bring corporations into the scene, and you have companies like Google and Facebook who perhaps are more powerful than many governments, and their accountability is very unclear. We know there's an obligation to them to uphold human rights, but to whom are they accountable when they don't? So it is a complex terrain. I'm also, but I think it's also interesting to think about it. It's interesting to hear the companies talk about community standards rather than human rights standards. And I'd like to hear why and what are the implications of that. So just the types of mechanisms, and I won't elaborate on them because there's no time, but there are global mechanisms, regional mechanisms, and national mechanisms. Which you use depends very much on your own context. If you have a state that does not have strong respect for human rights or functioning national mechanisms, you should focus more on using global mechanisms. But you can always use them at the same time. For this region, there are no regional mechanisms. I'm from Africa. We work with a regional mechanism, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So we can use that in conjunction with national mechanisms and global mechanisms. The main mechanisms are the treaty bodies, and I think we've heard a little bit about that. They're the special rapporteurs or the special mandate holders of the Human Rights Council. There's also the Office of the High Commission, which is not a mechanism, but we can work with it and use it. And then there's the Human Rights Council itself. The Human Rights Council is based in Geneva. It's an intergovernmental body. As NGOs, you don't always have much power there, but you can use it effectively if you are persistent and if you form alliances. And often you have to form alliances with other member states and even your own. The useful thing about these mechanisms is that they are cyclical. So the treaty body reviews are every 4 years. So if your country is being monitored for how it complies with human rights standards, you can influence that process, you can comment, and then you can monitor follow-up. And I think that's one of the challenges, because if you don't monitor the follow-up, it's actually not worth investing in it. Similarly, there's the Universal Periodic Review. Now that's done by the Human Rights Council, and that's a peer review process. So that's not where a committee of experts review the country's human rights records, which is what the treaty bodies do. The Universal Periodic Review has other member states reviewing the country that's being considered for review. Now that can be very tactical. In Africa, for example, we find that many African states take the views of other governments much more seriously than they do the views of human rights experts. So it's a question of understanding these mechanisms and deciding what to do with them. Special mandate holders, there are several. There's freedom of expression and opinion, peaceful assembly and association, violence against women. So you can use several, you can work with all of them. I'll mention specifically the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Opinion, David Kay at the moment, who I know that you've worked with on the Palestinian cybercrime legislation, for example. But you can work with them in various other ways as well. And they differ in their openness or in their interest, and they can be influential and sometimes not so influential, but they can be very powerful when it comes to creating exposure of individual rights violations as well. Just one of the challenges of all these mechanisms, which I think those of us working in digital rights find, is that when you're using these mechanisms, they are human rights mechanisms. So in a state or in a context like Palestine, Israel, where there are rights violations like torture, mass repression, illegal imprisonment, illegal occupation, it can become very difficult when you use human rights mechanisms to focus on digital rights, because often the human rights experts themselves will see this as less important than some of the other rights violations. So linking in or demonstrating how internet-related rights are integrated with fundamental human rights becomes very important for us to do. So I just want to jump really to the question of, do we use these rights or not? Or why do we use these mechanisms? Should we? They can be very boring. They can be very legalistic. They're time-consuming. Many activists reject the whole framing of individual rights. And it also involves complex coalitions. It involves working with governments that you often don't trust. it involves working with corporations that you are dependent on for your freedom of expression online, but you also don't necessarily trust whether they are seriously upholding rights or just trying to avoid being accused of violating rights, to sort of preempt repression. So it's complex, and I think the companies themselves tread quite a difficult line. On the one hand, they care about freedom of expression, but on the other hand, they also don't want to end up being banned by national regimes, for example. Our view is that it is important to use these mechanisms. I think we need to look at what would happen if we did not use them. I think they can help us. I think Josh talked about how sometimes when you talk about new technical means that violate rights, like artificial intelligence, it can actually lead you to stop thinking about the fundamental issues, the fundamental freedoms, and the injustice. I think working on rights mechanisms from an internet perspective helps you focus back on the fact that we are fighting for justice fundamentally, and how we deal with information and communications as part of that struggle. And I think similarly, it can help us confront and challenge both states and corporations, which I think is really important for us to do, and the complicitness, because that's one of our challenges. Often the corporations and the states are complicit with one another, not necessarily in a sinister way, but just that's how the world works. And I think what we should think about is what would happen if we did not use these mechanisms, if we just ignored them. What are the implications of that? Ultimately, I think it can enforce rule of law where it exists. Where rule of law does not exist, using human rights mechanisms can help us establish it and ensure that digital rights are part of that system.
شكرا أندريات. وصلنا لمرحلة الأسئلة، فرح ناخذ مجموعة من الأسئلة، بس رجاءً الأسئلة تكون أسئلة ومش مداخلات، وكل سؤال لا يتعدى 30 ثانية حتى يصح لعدد من أكبر عدد من الإخوان المشاركة. فبناخذ مجموعة من الأسئلة وبعدين رح نرجع لأجوبة، جولة من الأجوبة، ومن ثم بنجمل جلسة الحوار. اللي بده يسأل في ميكروفون هون وفي ميكروفون هناك، ده مصطفى بس ده ممكن تزحوه. فتتفضل على الميكروفون هنا جلال. ممكن تبدأ أنت، تفضل.
Okay. I want to ask in English because the question is for the product policy manager in Facebook. My name is Nadim Lais. I'm the media program coordinator of Shrouk organization. We in Palestine, in West Bank and Gaza, we have more than 2 million users in Facebook, but we don't have a branch in West Bank or Gaza for Facebook. So we're having a problem in reporting serious problems in Facebook. For example, hacked accounts, disabled accounts, and many other like abusement for Palestinians. So what are the possibilities that we as Palestinians can act to reach Facebook decision makers without taking like a long time, like when they closed the Palestinian official pages like Al-Quds or many other pages, we didn't find a solution. This took like 1 month or 2 months to reach and reactivate these pages. Thank you.
شكرا. مصطلح الإرهاب أنا برأيي جاءوا في الغرب على أساس يبرروا جرائمهم ضد الشعوب المحتلة. يعني أمريكا يوم أسست على ظهور الهنود الحمر، قتلوا الهنود الحمر وبنوا حضارتهم. الأوروبيين هم مستعمرون. الشعب الفلسطيني ليس إرهابي، الإرهابي هو المحتل، والإرهابي هو الذي يقتل الناس بالقنابل النووية في هيروشيما وناكازاكي، والإرهابي هو الذي يقتل أطفال العراق وأطفال أفغانستان وسوريا ولبنان واليمن. الإرهابي هو الذي يدعم إسرائيل بالأسلحة والإعلام. الإرهابي هو الذي يقول القدس هي عاصمة إسرائيل. لقد فتحت أبواب جهنم أمريكا على نفسها، لقد أيقظت مليون شخص. مسموع؟
هو مسموع بس اعطينا
انجليزي بس عم تحكي انجليزي
لا خليك بالعربي بس اعطينا سؤال مش
سؤال. السؤال ليه مش سؤال، هو زي هيك زي
خلينا نلزم بس
تعليق
بالحوار مع بعض. احنا
لما يكون
الاسئله
ماشي هذه فرصه، احنا ما بنشوفهم كل يوم، هدول ما بيجوا الا بالسنه مره. بدهم يعرفوا شو بصير في فلسطين، لازم يعرفوا
السؤال ده بهاي الطريقه. تفضل.
احنا شعب تحت الاحتلال. لما انا احط على اليوتيوب مثلا صورة جندي عمال بضرب في شخص او بقتل فيه، ليش الفيسبوك بمسحه؟ ليه؟ هذا يدل على ان الفيسبوك او مؤسسه هو صهيوني وهو يشتغل مع الاحتلال، يعمل مع احتلال. اما اذا كان هناك شيء يبين ان الفلسطيني يعتدي على مستوطن او يضرب امرأة، يقتل امرأة، فانه ينشرها في كل العالم. منظمة العفو الدولية تتحدث عن حقوق الانسان. اين حقوق اطفال فلسطين الذين يبلغ عمرهم 12 سنة ومسجونون عند الاحتلال؟ وانتم تتعامون يا منظمة العفو الدولية، تتعامون عن جرائم الاحتلال. انتم متواطئون لانكم لا تضغطون على الاحتلال. تتدخلش
رفيق صديقي طيب مشكور يعطيك العافيه.
تتدخلش، انا بحكي عن كل الشعب الفلسطيني مش
طيب تمام.
انا بدي ينصفونا
بس تجمل
يشكلوا لجنه ويروحوا يشوفوا الاسرى الفلسطينيين الاطفال والنساء التي تتحدث عن المرأة في فلسطين تحريرها. يجب ان تحرر من الاحتلال من السجون ثم تأتوا بدورات للمرأة والى اخره. انتم مشاركون مع الاحتلال، يجب ان تتحدثوا بقوة، لا تخجلوا ولا تخافوا. هناك قتل للشعب الفلسطيني، شاب فلسطيني عمره 12 عاما قتل برأسه لانه اطل من رأسه. هل ليس هذا ارهاب؟
تمام.
الارهاب
صديقي اخذت 30 ثانية 3 دقائق.
انا اقول المقاومة الفلسطينية،
اعطي الاخوان كمان يكملوا ويصلوا.
المقاومة الفلسطينية بكل انواعها المقاومة الفلسطينية بكل انواعها هي حق للشعب الفلسطيني، بإبداع من الكلمة وانتهاء بالقنبلة. يعطيك العافية.
شكرا. في دور اللي بده يسأل يوقف على الدور. في دور شباب.
I have a follow-up question. Actually, two questions. One is for Ms. Tawab. Protected groups and terrorism are such a broad concept and are defined, as you said, by American and British laws. Thus, they are inherently biased. Then how can you justify your argument that you are objective while you are conforming to legal and social values of specific legal systems and enforcing them on other groups of people, ironically, on the same protected groups that you claim to protect? The second question is for Ms. Ibeen from Facebook. Facebook is allegedly engaged in providing sensitive and personal information of its users to third parties without direct consent of the users in question. This raises a broader question whether you believe in practice act as if this information is owned by you, by the platform, rather than the user. If we look at the history of Facebook in managing the data, you act as the sole owner of the information submitted to the platform. Is it a policy or a decision or a convenience for you? And for other more questions and issues, I would like to talk with you more further.
شكرا.
قاسم طوبال. أنا راح أسأل سؤالي بالعربي بس له علاقة related للسكيورتي والبرايفسي. بالنسبة للابليكيشنز زي فيسبوك أو ابليكيشن من جوجل، بالعادة we allow the applications to access the camera and microphones. هلا قديش هذا الإشي بضل موجود وقديش فيه بيكون تعاون مع الحكومات بالعادة لحتى إنه إحنا ممكن ما نعمل بوست للإشي بس اوريدي المايكس مفتوحة، لو سكرنا الابليكيشن بضل المايكس اوريدي ذير. قديش احنا عن جد عندنا امان من هاي الناحيه.
تمام شكرا. ناخذ سؤال بس من هاي الجهه كمان. تفضل.
Hello, my name is Rashid Abaide. I'm a developer of a game called Layla and the Shadows of War, and it's presented here. You can try it. So my question to Sebastian and maybe also to Mr. Joshua, when I released the game, it was rejected by the App Store because they said it has a political statement. At that time, I didn't know what I have to do, so I turned to social media and I get like help. Some people from activists picked the news and they released like some posts about it, and it was accepted after that on App Store. So, but my question at that situation, what should I do? Which organization should I contact to get support for republishing or for posting the game again? Thank you.
شكرا. كمان سؤال وبننتقل لهناك.
يعطيكم العافية. سؤالي للثواب، أنا عندي سؤالين بالأحرى. السؤال الأول من تجربة شخصية، كان في عندنا قناة اللي فيها أكثر من 1000 فيديو، اللي انمحت القناة كلياتها بسبب فيديو واحد اللي هو مخالف للبوليسي تبعت الموقع. مش انمحى الفيديو أو بعت لنا رسالة بخصوصه. وبخصوص كمان التوثيق الاعتقالات القسرية أو اعتداءات الشرطة مثل ما شفنا بمصر، وانمحت كل الفيديوهات اللي رفعها وائل عباس بخصوص التعذيب اللي في السجون. أي سياسة عادة تتبعوها بمصر، خصوصا أنه في هناك نظام ديكتاتوري؟ شكرا.
تمام، ناخذ الأسئلة من هناك.
Hi, Elena Gostoli, freelance journalist. My question is for AB from Facebook. I was wondering how do you respond to accusations that Facebook is biased, and what do you say about the fact that more posts are taken down that are made by Palestinians than Israelis, when there is a lot of so-called incitement on the Israeli Facebook as well. And also, last year, Facebook notoriously met with Gilad Erdan and Ayelet Shaked. I was wondering if since you have met with Palestinian leaders as well, and what was the outcome of that meeting?
شكرا.
Similar question, but can you respond directly to the recent article on December 29th on Intercept by Glenn Greenwald saying that Facebook took down 20 groups' Facebook content and page after meeting with the Israeli government and military, the force, and how would you respond to that article? I haven't seen any official Facebook responses.
تمام. بنكمل مع حسين آخر 4 أسئلة بس على أساس نعطي كمان إمكانية للأجوبة.
مرحبا. سؤالي برضه لإيبي إنكيلار. ب 2016 تسكر حسابي على الفيسبوك، وكان ضمن أولى الحسابات اللي تسكرت من إدارة الفيسبوك، وكان في رفض أو عدم اعتراف من الفيسبوك إنه في اتفاق مع دولة الاحتلال، وزميلها بالمنتدى السابق قال إنه ما كان في اتفاق بين الفيسبوك والاحتلال على تسكير الحسابات الفلسطينية. وقبل أسبوعين كان في صحيفة أمريكية ونشرت ضمنيا إنه كان في اعتراف بالفيسبوك إنه سكر الحسابات من خلال اتفاق مع الاحتلال. فإحنا اليوم وين مع الفيسبوك؟ في اتفاق ولا لا؟ وإذا كان في اتفاق لازم يكون في وضوح كامل. أنا بحكي عن الصحيفة الأمريكية، وهو خبر أمريكي وكان صحفي أمريكي مش عارف شو اسمه، بس ذكر إنه الفيسبوك اعترف بوجود اتفاق ومن خلالها تسكرت الحسابات ومن ضمنها حسابي.
تمام. إخوان رجاء الاختصار بس، أسئلة على السريع.
مرحبا، اسمي محمود مطار، صحفي. نفس الموضوع اللي سأله زميلنا السابق. في نهاية عام 2016 كان هناك في نهاية عام 2016 اتفاق بين حكومة الاحتلال وإدارة الفيسبوك، وتم على أساس هذا الاتفاق تشكيل فريق لرصد المحتوى الفلسطيني وإزالته من الفيسبوك. سؤالي، كيف تبرر الفيسبوك كشركة أو ما بعرف إيش تصنفوها أنشئت أصلا في سبيل يعني إتاحة المجال لحرية الرأي والتعبير في العالم؟ كيف تبرر هذا التناقض والتعاون والانحياز الواضح في سياساتها وتعاملها وإجراءاتها فيما يتعلق بالمحتوى الفلسطيني؟ وشكرا. طبعا السؤال لممثلة فيسبوك.
شكرا. آخر سؤالين تفضلوا.
I'm Kamil Ahmed, I'm a journalist for YouTube and Facebook representatives. You kind of give a practical guide of how people should post, but I think actual concerns are government policy and how you work with governments, which is more opaque. So do you accept, or how do you rebalance that process, especially considering while you have a relationship with governments, like people said, they don't have an office or they don't have platforms to actually connect with you. So do you accept there's a balance, and how do you have a plan to address that?
Thanks. آخر سؤال.
واقع سؤالين. السؤال الأول لمس إبلين. بالنسبة اللوكيشنز لما بنعمل اي بوست، بما انه احنا بنكون بمنطقة فلسطينية، بكون بمدينة كبيرة فلسطينية، اعطيني لوكيشن مستوطنة صغيرة او مستعمرة حكومية إسرائيلية، بتعطيني اللوكيشن تاعها مش الموقع الفلسطيني لمدينة كبيرة تكون هي الأساس. وللمستر جوشوا سؤال، انه بالنسبة للشركات اللي بتعمل اناليسز للداتا تاعت الفيسبوك وبتخزن الداتا وبتبيعها، شو احنا بالنسبة لنا كمواطنين بنقدر نعمل؟ بنقدر نرفع عليهم دعوة او نقدر نقاضيهم انه احنا موقعين برايفسي كونتراكت مع الفيسبوك ومع اليوتيوب انه ممنوع المحتوى خاص فيا، ممنوع انه ينباع. فشو بالنسبة لهدول الشركات؟ ثانك يو.
شكرا. فبنبدا مع ثواب وجولة أجوبة.
Okay. Sorry, there was a lot of questions. Not as much as Facebook got, though.
I'm ready.
Okay. First, I guess I want to address the question around, and I think it came from two people, just around an inherent bias around our policies around content related to terrorism. So as the other panelists, sorry, I forgot your name at the end. Henriette, said earlier, is in writing our guidelines, we have to strike a balance between free expression and then also laws that are out there. So there is laws in the U.S. that we cannot serve terrorist groups as defined by the U.S. So they cannot hold any YouTube accounts. I don't want to speak for Facebook, but they can also not hold Facebook accounts. And if we don't follow that, then YouTube will be shut down. So then nobody has YouTube. So we have to strike that balance. So you can't, if somebody is from a prescribed terrorist organization, they cannot hold an account. But then beyond that, regardless of who you are, our policies are global. You cannot, it doesn't matter what side you're on, what position you're in, you can't incite violence on YouTube. But given that we do understand that YouTube is also a platform for activism, for political resistance, for all forms of critiquing all governments. And we do allow that. And if you actually go on YouTube, you can find content that talks about the occupation, content that does show what the gentleman very passionately spoke about, that does show interviews with Palestinian prisoners, that does show children getting arrested, that you even have the footage of Ahad Tamimi confronting the Israeli soldier that led to her arrest. That is all on YouTube. As long as there's context provided, that content is allowed. And I understand as well the concept of one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and vice versa. And I know that very well on a personal level as a Syrian. So again, it's about striking that balance and working with you and hearing that feedback from you and keeping that door open of communication. If you can explain why you're uploading footage, you can talk about what you perceive to be as the oppressor, as a terrorist on your YouTube channel. You can have these conversations, and we will work to protect those types of conversations. But at the same time, our community guidelines are there trying to strike that balance. Okay, I hope that addresses the question around that. And then another question I got was from here about, what was it, YouTube accounts?
Down the whole channel while one was...
Well, for one video, okay. I'm not sure what happened in that particular case, but maybe you can share it with me afterwards. Normally, it should be that only if there are 3 videos that violate our guidelines, then that will lead to the whole account suspension, but you can appeal the suspension. It could be that things now will be different, because now instead of removing a video, we might put it into private mode. But before, in our old system, if you don't have enough context, you would get a strike and then 3 strikes means you're out. But now it should be put into private. So maybe we can look at those accounts again. And then recently, like, we've been working with Witness to restore a lot of Syrian accounts that we removed because our machines flagged them as terrorism content. But then we realized that it wasn't the case, that a lot of this footage intended to only document acts of violence. And working with Witness, we've restored hundreds of accounts. So sometimes, you know, if appealing doesn't work, you can reach out to an organization like Witness, which will talk to us, and we will restore accounts where we can. And then the last question is, how can we work with governments? Unfortunately, I can't really answer that question because I'm not on the team. We have the public policy team that communicates with governments. But I do know that in order to operate in a country, you do have to communicate with the government. Otherwise, like, the government, such as in Turkey, will ban YouTube if we don't talk to them. So I think we'd rather keep that door open so that everyone can have access to YouTube, because as we know, it's important to have access to platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, because right now the reality is the only way to tell your story is if you use those mediums, because they have the biggest reach. And yeah, I hope that answers all your questions. Thanks.
Yep. So I think I could be here for a while. I want to thank you for being so honest with the questions. Nothing would be worse if I walked out of here and didn't get a sense of the frustration and the issues you are facing. So thank you for being really honest. A lot of the questions kind of overlap, so I'm going to try and cover some key points, and then if there's anything remaining, we can talk about that. So firstly, to the gentleman from Gaza, I very much accept that it's challenging when there's no office in a country. We actually don't have offices in most countries that we operate in. And I know that there are mistakes that are happening because we have humans reviewing content, and mistakes do happen. So there are 2 things that we can do to address that. Firstly, I'm here and I'm a channel, and we'll give you my email address. And when you see those instances where you're like, why is my account down? It may have been a mistake. I can investigate it for you. And secondly, we take that feedback to our teams, because obviously our tools are not working well enough sometimes. So when we get these kind of escalations from NGOs, we actually take that feedback to our teams and say, can you deep dive into this, and we can try and fix, perhaps it's a technical issue, etc. But I really accept that it's challenging, and that's why I'm here, to try and mitigate and help you through that. So there were several questions about the Intercept article. And again, this actually did spring from a lot of misconceptions. And as well, in our dealings with the Israeli government, there's been a lot of press coverage and questioning about that. We engage all over the world with governments, NGOs, academics. As Thawab said, it's important when you're operating in any country that you do that. It doesn't mean that we take a position on governments or their actions. When it comes to the Israeli government having special treatment, that's actually not the case. In the same way that many people have a channel to us, they can send us reports and we review them, and actually most of them are just removed for community standards. So they're reporting things like dangerous organizations, and we will remove that content for violation of our community standards, in the same way that if any of you send me a report, I would do the exact same thing. So I want to make it really clear, there are no special treatment for any government entity around this world. Is it okay? Yeah, so there really is no special treatment, and I want to assure you of that, because we have seen so much press coverage saying there's a special agreement, you know, they went and met with them, they obviously are giving out user data without following process. That's really, really not the case, and we want to be, as I spoke about earlier, serving all of our users as equally as possible, and applying our community standards equally upon report, regardless of who it's from. Secondly, on the privacy issue, user privacy, and privacy is a human right, and we have lawyers working to ensure that the privacy of our users is respected and upheld. We don't give out, you know, data willy-nilly to governments around the world. We are under strict human rights analysis. We have a partnership with the Global Network Initiative. We actually became a member in 2013. The analysis came out in 2016 that we are fully compliant. And we want to uphold human rights through all that we do at Facebook, and privacy is a human right. So we will only give governments who request user data, and they often sometimes do in law enforcement cases. So for example, there may be a suicide case and they may want information about where that person is located. We have a very strict legal process, and that's internationally standardized legal process on how law enforcement can request data. Now we're very aware that this is a very, it's a contentious issue. So we have a transparency report. It's published twice a year. We have a page for Palestine, we have a page for Israel, and you can see all of the requests for data that we receive there. So we want to be transparent. We absolutely are not in the business of treating governments differently and giving out information in ways that is not following due legal process. So I think those are the kind of key points I want to hit, and just to assure you there's no special treatment, and that I am here and I can give many of you my email. And when we want to engage more people on the ground, my colleague Julie is actually here from our safety team, and she works on issues of child safety and gender violence. And these issues are important everywhere to all our users, and you could not say any different. So we are here to really engage with you, listen, learn, and build up those channels for you to send content to us that violates our community standards. So, no, that's a very fair question. So I was hoping to give my card to the gentleman who spoke earlier, but we are engaged with a little bit with the law enforcement team, and we have done some cases with them. But again, we're open to doing more, and that's why I'm here. Well, we have official meetings every week, all week, with various government. It just happened to be that the Israeli one was heavily publicized. But we are, I'm here, and I know there was somebody from the ministry earlier, and I will try and get my contact details to that person. Our meetings around the world are different with every government. So we have various people who travel. We actually had Palestinian group over in our headquarters in Menlo Park not so long ago, last year. But we are looking to set up more. So we actually hired a new person to manage public relations for Middle East. And she has only recently been hired, and she will move to do more work in that area. But I will definitely keep you updated.
I'm sorry, I have to say that we are very late, and we have to continue, and the organizers are pushing me on this. So that everybody would know, the speakers will stay with us. So later in the breaks, you can come one-to-one and ask your questions and clarify the things. But we really have to summarize. So if the rest of the speakers want to just to blow
Sorry, I just want to say that I'll be in the workshop in the afternoon with Dia from Witness on moderating content. So for anyone who has more questions for YouTube specifically, you can attend that in the afternoon.
So about the cameras and the microphones, very short, people putting stickers over the cameras, of course, it works. With microphones, it's a little bit more difficult. What we do in investigative journalism, we neuter actually the phones, remove the microphones in the phone, and use the stick-on microphones if we still want to communicate, or the earpieces, because we're kind of cautious when it comes to what an app can do or what an operating system can do if it's compromised. I wouldn't say any kind of official app from Google or Facebook would ever listen onto you without your consent. But sometimes people are not aware that they have a gaming app on and it's actually listening on you and trying to record for advertising reasons, and then it gets transferred and then somebody else can listen in. Second thing, if you ever want to know how the process works, you should look at international rules of law in court. So if you want to know if Skype is compromised, if you can tap in on Skype, try to find decisions where, in a criminal case, Skype was actually used as evidence. And usually by that you find out that there is a tap-in possibility, or WhatsApp is actually at some point compromised in Germany. So we as journalists, investigative journalists, we look very detailed on different countries and see what kind of access is granted. It's not a specific regional problem, it's a global problem that tools can be used actually to compromise your privacy and compromise the integrity. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. But before I do, I just want to quickly respond to a point that you made about YouTube and local legislation, specifically with regards to the responsibility of companies to respect human rights. That's an obligation above and that supersedes national law. And that's important. When I was in Belarus, looking at the surveillance issue, I spoke, to some of the telecoms, European telecoms operating there, who operate in such a way that they give the KGB, the Secret Service, direct access to people's communications. And the excuse I got was, well, we have to follow local law. And that's not good enough. There is an obligation to use your leverage with these governments to ensure that you're living up to your human rights standards. And I would say, your company has a good amount of leverage that can be used. So that's just a point to say that it's not the end of it, and I'm not insinuating that you're not using your leverage. I'm just saying it's not the end of the question that there is a law in the world that conflicts with human rights standards. That's important to recall when you're looking in any national context. Regarding the app question, I can't see the guy who asked that, but find me later because I don't really know the question, but I'll be happy to think it through with you. And then regarding, data brokers, and I should be clear, I'm not saying that Facebook is selling data to data brokers, but many other companies are, and there are, it depends on the jurisdiction, and I'm not familiar with the data protection legislations in force here. In the US, there are very few restrictions on data being sold and bought by data brokers, except in certain very narrow circumstances around things like credit decisions or student data or things, narrow carve-outs. In Europe, there's going to be a law taking effect in May called the Global Data Protection Regulation, which will regulate some of these things. But I think a more useful thing to say beyond simply we should be working for strong data protection everywhere that it's important is that we should be thinking about things like pushing for change at the local level. If you have a chance, in New York, there was an attempt to pass a city-level algorithmic transparency law saying that if algorithms are making decisions about you should have a right to understand that. I don't remember the final form that ended up in, but the point is these things can be done locally as well. I was involved in lobbying for regulation of the data broker industry in Vermont, which is a state within the US. And lastly, I would point to the good example of the Oakland Privacy Commission, which is a city on the west coast of America, where they have an independent commission who, amongst other things, make sure that their civil society and people have a say in how the government, when the government buys new technology that could be used in a way that impacts on human rights, that is sort of, that there's a public consultation on that, and that police departments and governments are not stocking up on surveillance equipment without letting anybody know what they have to use. So those would be some examples to think about from elsewhere in the world.
Thanks. Not much to add. I think just a few things to summarize. I think we need to understand the business model. I think we often don't talk enough of how the business model for the platforms work and what constraints that places on the companies themselves and their ongoing profitability and viability, as well as constraints on rights. And when the business model is based on user data, even if companies are still respecting privacy, there still are risks there for users. Secondly, I think we need to understand the technology. I don't think we should assume that Facebook listens to us, or that cameras are watching what we're doing, or mics are monitoring what we do. If you look at really how the technology itself works and how user data is aggregated, third-party roles, that's really what we should be looking at technically and at the business level. And then I think we need to focus on fundamental rights and fundamental mechanisms. And I think there are traps here for ourselves as activists, and I think also for the companies. I think, for example, as you are trying to apply community standards, the important and helpful emphasis on counter-speech, on being positive, on framing the context when we upload political content. I completely understand where companies are coming from, but that can also begin to unintentionally or not, contain bias. It's a way of saying that some types of political action is more legitimate than other types of political action. And I think the only way around that really is transparency. More transparency. I know the companies they have transparency reports, but at the moment I think mostly those reports contain what states require you to do. And what we don't understand enough yet is how companies apply their own community standards. So more transparency around that and lots of engagement.
شكرا لكل المتحدثين. بتأمل أنه بالفعل ألقينا الضوء ولو بالقليل على كل مواضيع التكنولوجيا، سياسات النشر والحقوق الرقمية. ومنرجع المايك لمصطفى.